August 18th, 1974. 2:13 a.m. $100 bill spins in a puddle on 125th Street, and a man with a leaking shoulder keeps whispering one word: Bronx. $30 million has just been redirected in the dark. And the impossible part isn't the theft. It's that Frank, Lucas, and Nicky Barnes are still breathing. Sirens are distant, not the official kind, but private ones. Cadillac horns, engines idling, shoes on concrete. In Harlem, money doesn't move alone. It moves with witnesses and with predators who arrive before the police. Tonight, someone wants the cash, and someone wants their names erased permanently. Frank stands under a flickering streetlight, suit crisp, face unreadable, hands empty. Nicky lingers 2 steps behind, coat open, chin high, eyes bright with the kind of confidence that provokes bullets. The wounded runner tries to rise, smearing dark across the sidewalk. Frank doesn't touch him. Touching is how you inherit a dying man's problem. Across the avenue, a long car rolls slow, then stops at the corner, idling like a judge. A smaller Ford slides in behind it. The street holds its breath. Nicky whispers, "They're stacking the board." Frank answers, "They want us to panic first." Not yet. The runner's lips work like broken machinery. Frank leans in, shadow covering the man's eyes. One sentence Frank says. The runner swallows blood and air. "Tony's guards ain't Tony's," he rasps. Genovese faces. New rules. Nicky's smile thins to a razor. In their world, new rules means one thing. Somebody rewrote the night before it began. Frank looks at the dead payphone, the blacked-out block, the cars waiting politely at the corner. "They're not here to say hello," he murmurs. "They're here to watch who reaches." A distant siren rises, then fades away, like the city practicing denial for now. In 1974, New York ran on fear, favors, and cash folded into envelopes. Harlem was a kingdom taxed by Italian families who never had to visit to collect. Frank Lucas hated paying tribute. He spoke softly because loud men were easy to find. He kept records as head and friends on a need-to-know diet. Nicky Barnes loved the spotlight because it made other men blink. Furs, clubs, headlines. Nicky turned attention into armor. They distrusted each other, but the Genovese squeeze was tightening. Higher fees, fewer protections, more disrespect, and whispers that both kings were getting too big too fast. Fat Tony wasn't a corner seller. He was a banker with dirty hands. His men moved heroin, his accountants moved numbers, and his money moved upward into 5 different family pockets like a river splitting into tributaries. Hit Tony, and you didn't just steal from one dealer. You interrupted the Mafia's weekly heartbeat. Payoffs to cops, judges, union muscle, club owners, and the quiet men who made problems disappear. That's why Tony's cash wasn't kept in apartments. It sat behind steel in the Bronx, guarded by professionals who didn't ask for names. Touch that vault, and you signed your death certificate. The warehouse squatted off Westchester Avenue, bricks stained with decades of exhaust, windows painted over from inside. No sign, no business hours. 2 steel doors, each with fresh weld marks, and a chain-link yard that looked abandoned until you noticed the men who never leaned. 15 guards on rotation, most ex-military, some pure street, all paid enough to stay loyal for a week at a time. On the roof, a pair of silhouettes watched the avenues like lighthouse keepers. Inside, the cash weighed more than greed. 30 million in bundles, 100 kilos of paper, turning speed into a problem. Frank built the job like an invoice. Blackout, breach, bags vanish. No elegance, no speeches, just pressure faster than minds could adjust. He hired Black Vietnam veterans who came home trained for chaos and handed a bus pass. They didn't need hype. They needed rent money and a reason. Nicky wanted a loud front door, a message the borough could hear. Frank wanted angles, quiet entries, exits already owned before the first shout. They argued over coffee until Frank ended it. If a hand goes up, it goes down in 2 seconds. Nicky hated the rule, but he respected the math. At 2:15 a.m., the lights died in a ring around the warehouse. 2 blocks of darkness that felt engineered. The street didn't go silent, it went alert. A dog barked once, then stopped. A train clattered in the distance. Frank and Nicky arrived in separate cars, engines off, rolling the last 100 feet on momentum. Their men fanned out without chatter, boots finding gravel, shoulders tight. The guards inside saw nothing at first, only the power failure and the irritation that came with it. That irritation was the opening. Confusion is a door until it swings, and people step through. The first impact wasn't a firefight. It was a crash of metal and a wave of stinging smoke that made eyes water and lungs argue. Guards shouted, stumbling toward doorways that felt wrong. Someone yelled, "Police," because that word was safer than the truth. Frank moved like he was late for a meeting, scanning corners, reading silhouettes, watching hands. Nicky moved like a storm, pushing forward, demanding space. A guard reached for a radio and found only dead air. Another tried the wall phone and heard nothing. In the darkness, the warehouse became a country with no laws except speed. They pushed deeper past pallets and a thin-walled office. A guard, pinned and shaking, claimed the main steel door needed Tony. Frank watched the guard's eyes flick toward one crate that didn't belong. He dragged it aside and found a smaller panel, clean metal in a dirty room. "That's the one," Frank said. Keys clinked. The panel opened. Bundles of cash filled the space, and behind them sat blue packages stacked like inventory. On the floor, a wounded guard crawled toward a red alarm button under a hinge cover. Nicky saw it, lunged, and the hand froze short of contact. Outside, engines multiplied. Doors slammed. Voices carried through the brick with that relaxed confidence men have when they believe they own the ending. Nicky stared at the blue packages as if they were a second jackpot. "We take all of it," he said. Frank didn't raise his voice. "We take cash and we leave weight." Nicky's jaw flexed. "That weight is profit." Frank's eyes stayed flat. "That weight is a leash." Another bang hit the outer door. The room tightened. 3 minutes, Frank said. Nicky hesitated, pride wrestling survival, then spat to the side. "Fine. Green only. Move. Right now." They loaded fast. Not neatly, bags thudding into trunks, straps biting into shoulders. Nobody celebrated. Celebration slowed hands. When they burst into the yard, headlights flared from the street like eyes opening. A long sedan blocked the far exit, and another car slid in behind it, trying to turn the yard into a pen. Frank's driver punched the wheel and cut toward the weaker gap, tires grinding gravel. Nicky's car followed, close enough to taste exhaust. Behind them, horns blared, and the chase began, sedans moving as a pack, not frantic, just certain. The city fed on certainty and never blinked. Frank didn't chase speed. He chased interference. At Southern Boulevard, a sanitation truck rolled into the intersection, yellow lights blinking. Frank's driver cut in front of it and forced a jackknife that clogged the lane behind. The pursuers hesitated, then split around, still close. In Nicky's back seat, an overstuffed bag shifted and tore. Hundreds of bills spilled into the street, spinning under headlights. Pedestrians saw green paper and ran into the road, grabbing at air. The pack had to break, swerve, choose. Money didn't just buy power, it bought seconds. Behind them, one sedan kept coming, patient, hungry, unhurried. That last sedan didn't honk or flash. It held the lane like ownership. Nicky twisted around. Not Tony's boys. Frank watched the discipline and named it. Genovese. They slid under the cross Bronx expressway and into a service road of fences and sleeping trucks. The sedan followed until a fork split the dark. Frank's driver killed the headlights and coasted into the left branch. The sedan hesitated, chose the right, and disappeared. When the Buick's lights returned, the city looked ordinary again, which was its most dangerous trick. Frank said, "Now we find out what's ours, And who thinks otherwise? By 3:04 a.m., they were in a windowless room above a shuttered storefront, one bare bulb buzzing. The bag sat on the floor, heavy and alive. Nicky wanted to celebrate. Frank wanted to listen for the city's reply. "We did it," Nicky said. Frank nodded. "We did it. Now we pay." They opened a bag. Bundles crisp and banded, the kind of cash that never visits a bank. Beneath them lay a thin ledger, names and numbers in careful ink. Frank's gaze hardened. Money bought power once. Names bought it forever. Outside, dawn came, and rumors moved faster than light. By morning, barbershops and bodegas carried the story in whispers. Blackout, warehouse, money falling like confetti, Italians arriving late and furious. The papers printed versions, calling it a suspected dispute, but the street knew it was an insult delivered in cash. The five families didn't call police, they called each other. A commission met behind curtains, men in suits talking softly about humiliation. Someone had to pay for allowing Harlem hands on Italian money. Fat Tony stopped being seen. Some said he fled. Some said he was removed for shame. No obituary ran. In that world, disappearance was punishment. Frank and Nicky split the take like men splitting dynamite. Carefully, eyes on each other. Nicky wanted flash, expansion, the city watching him spend. Frank wanted insulation and supply. He knew money was loud, but supply was silent power. With cash like that, Frank could buy access, planes, couriers, and patience at borders. He mentioned Thailand like it was weather and shipping like it was bookkeeping. Nicky laughed. "You always thinking tomorrow." Frank answered, "Tomorrow is where they hunt." The room went quiet because both understood the curse inside the score. Outside, every car sounded like a question with teeth. The ledger wasn't accounting. It was a map of protection. Precinct captains, union men, club owners, the judge's initials, tiny ink, big power. Frank understood the vault wasn't only Tony's. It was a shared artery. That meant the robbery was exposure. If the wrong hand saw those names, the Italians couldn't just retaliate. They'd have to erase history, relocate loyalties, and silence witnesses. Nicky wanted to burn it. "Trouble," he said. Frank kept it. "Leverage." Nicky snorted. "Leverage gets you buried." Frank replied, "So does weakness." They packed the ledger under cash, because paper could be heavier than money at all. By afternoon, whispers reached them through different mouths. The Genovese were asking questions, quietly, the way men ask before hands start working. A messenger from a downtown social club offered to sit down like it was polite. Frank refused by not showing. Nicky wanted to hit first, loud, to prove the score hadn't rattled them. Frank warned him loudness was how federal men took notes. The danger wasn't just bullets. It was paperwork. The robbery created a vacuum, and vacuums pull predators. Even their own crew watched them differently, measuring exits. Every smile felt rented. Every handshake felt like a search. Frank spent the next weeks converting chaos into structure. He bought silence with envelopes and bought routes with favors. He didn't celebrate the robbery. He invested it. Nicky spent the next weeks turning the robbery into legend. He let the city see fur collars, champagne, loud laughter, because reputation could act like a bodyguard. Both approaches worked until they didn't. The Italians hunted in shadows, delegating vengeance to men who wanted promotions. The government watched the money ripple and asked where it came from. In New York, you could outrun one predator, but not two, when the second carried a badge. 2 nights later, at 11:46 p.m., a bartender at a midtown lounge slid Frank a napkin with only an address and the words, "Bring respect." Frank didn't take the napkin. He paid for his drink, left a 10, and walked out into rain without looking back. On the sidewalk, Nicky cursed. "That's a summons," he said. "You ignore that, they think you scared." Frank kept walking. "If I go, they control the room," he said. "If I don't, they have to guess." Nicky's laugh was sharp. "Guessing makes men shoot." Frank answered, Guessing also makes men miss. We keep moving. Frank tested loyalty like a mechanic tests brakes, quietly, while the car still moves. He sent a courier with a false drop and watched who asked questions. The rumor returned too fast. Someone was talking for survival. Nicky wanted names and immediate punishment. Frank wanted proof. He invited the suspect to breakfast on Amsterdam Avenue at 8:09 a.m., sun bright and unforgiving. Over eggs, Frank asked one casual question about the warehouse. The man answered with details Frank had never shared. Frank smiled, paid, and walked out. The verdict stayed unspoken, but it was final. In this city, silence sentenced. Nicky couldn't live in shadows. September 2nd, 1974, 1:22 a.m., he walked into a Harlem club in a white coat that caught every light. People parted. He tipped the band, kissed cheeks, and made sure the room saw him smiling. Outside, a plain sedan held two men pretending to read papers at night. One lifted a camera, snapped, lowered it. Federal. Nicky noticed and grinned wider, daring them. Frank heard by morning and said, "Every picture is a hook. They don't tug. They reel. Nicky unsvidid. Latch inhale. I'll cut the line." Frank didn't argue. He counted the cost. 1 week later, 6:38 p.m., Frank's car stopped at a red light near 149th Street. Two unmarked cars slid in front and behind. Men stepped out with police posture, one flashing something that might have been a badge. "Step out, Mr. Lucas," he said, too familiar. Frank stayed seated, eyes on mirrors. His driver rolled forward as if complying, then cut into a delivery lane. The blocking car hesitated, unwilling to crash in daylight. Horns erupted. Pedestrians shouted. In that noise, Frank slipped away. Nicky called it luck. Frank called it proof. The war had moved into public for real. That night, Frank admitted what he'd suspected since the runner spoke. The warehouse score might have been bait. If Genovese's muscle waited there, they weren't guarding Tony. They were hunting whoever dared touch the pipeline. The cash was the cheese. The trap was the reaction. Frank laid the ledger on the table and tapped a precinct captain's name. "This is why," he said. "They care about paper." Nicky's grin died. "They want that book back." Frank nodded. "But they want it burned with us." The robbery stopped being about money and became about survival under a microscope starting right now. Frank proposed a message that didn't require bullets. They would leak one harmless page, enough to scare the Genovese, without exposing the source. "Let them sweat," Frank said. "Sweat makes mistakes." Nicky hated indirect moves. Mistakes don't die. People do. Frank met his eyes. If we kill the wrong man, the city unites against us. If we scare the right men, it fractures for us. Nicky exhaled. "Who carries your leak?" Frank said, "A cop with ambition." Nicky nodded slowly. "The worst kind." Frank replied, "Exactly. Within hours, that cop would call a number twice, and the second ring would decide everything." September 9th, 1974, 9:17 p.m. The phone rang twice. Frank answered on the second ring. A cop's voice, confident. "Mr. Lucas, we should talk about your excitement in the Bronx." Frank kept his tone flat. "Where?" "Dino's on Arthur Avenue. Back booth. Come alone." Nicky hovered in the doorway, eyes hard. "Set up," he mouthed. Frank covered the receiver. "Everything is." Then he said, "I'll be there." After the click, Nicky whispered, "If it turns ugly, I want to be the ugly." Frank replied, "If it turns ugly, we lose the mirror." They drove north with no headlights, listening for tails. Dino smelled like garlic and secrets. The cop sat in the back booth, clean hands, restless eyes. "You boys took something you shouldn't," he said. Nicky rose an inch. Frank stopped him with a glance. "We took what was there," Frank said. The cop leaned closer. "I can keep Italians off you. I want a souvenir. A ledger. Names." Frank let silence stretch. "And what do you want tonight?" he asked. The cop smiled. "Cash." Frank nodded. "Then you're not protection. You're another mouth." The cop's smile vanished. "Mouths bite," he said. Frank replied, "Not if you pull their teeth." Frank slid one sheet across the table. Not the ledger, a page with a few names, real enough to scare, harmless enough to lose. That's your appetizer, he said. The cop's eyes flicked as he read. Outside, a car idled too long. Nicky noticed. Frank stayed still. They'll kill me, the cop whispered. Then act like you want to live, Frank said. What do you want? Tell them you never saw me. Tell them the page came from someone else. The cop nodded, fear turning into emotion. Nicky smiled. Make him run. Frank agreed. Running spreads rumors, and rumors start wars. Within 48 hours, the leak worked. The Genovese grew paranoid. Captains called captains. Union men denied friendships. Club owners paid debts early. When power gets nervous, it trips. The Italians audited loyalty in silence. Men vanished from their stools, and phones stopped ringing. Nicky enjoyed the panic. They sweating, he said. Frank stayed flat. Sweat is water. Blood comes after. He told Nicky to tighten his circle and assume every friendly face had an ear. Nicky mocked him. 3 days later, one trusted guy didn't show. His mother got a call. Tell him he missed rent. The city was collecting. Frank handled his leak without headlines. The breakfast suspect was invited to an empty apartment with one chair. Frank spoke softly. You told stories that weren't yours. The man tried to bargain. Frank didn't argue. He left and shut the door. Later, the building super said he heard a long conversation. Then nothing, like acceptance had finally arrived. The man never appeared in Harlem again. Some said he caught a bus south. Some said he found religion. Frank never corrected anyone. Nicky asked what happened. Frank replied, he stopped being in the way. In that business, disappearing was the answer. October came and the city tightened. Patrol cars lingered outside clubs. Plainclothes men asked polite questions in rude tones. At 4:12 p.m. one afternoon, Nicky's driver spotted a tail that didn't hide. Nicky wanted to confront it. Frank insisted they cancel meetings and stop being predictable. Predictable is how they write the report, Frank said. I'm not living like a ghost, Nicky snapped. Frank replied, you already are. That night a knock hit Nicky's door at 2:03 a.m. He stayed silent. By morning, a newspaper on his stoop had 2 words circled in ink, grand jury. He smiled, walked out. By winter, the robbery felt less like victory and more like a siren that never stopped. The Italians never admitted the theft, but every favor came with sharper teeth. The ambitious cop stopped calling. Ambition found a safer buyer. Frank noticed new faces near his spots, men who watched more than they spoke. Nicky noticed too and doubled down because backing down felt like dying. Frank tried to explain, the crown makes you visible. Nicky laughed. Then I'll be the brightest thing in a room. Frank answered, bright things attract flames. Somewhere a file opened with their names on it. Years later, people argued about the number, 30 million or legend. Numbers grow when fear tells the story. What didn't change was the lesson. 2 Harlem kings touched an Italian artery and lived long enough to spend the insult. The city never forgave audacity. It recorded it and built cases around it. Frank ended up behind bars, still quiet, still counting. Nicky ended up behind bars too, still loud, still smiling at danger. The money didn't save them. It bought time. And time, in New York, is the most expensive thing you can steal. That night proved it. Fear buys silence. Back on 125th Street, the puddle dried by noon, and the $100 bill was gone, pocketed by somebody who never learned why it floated there. That's New York. History drops clues, and strangers spend them. Frank Lucas and Nicky Barnes stole money. Yes, but they also stole certainty from men who believed they owned the city. For a few hours, the Mafia had to wonder who else might reach into their vault. That doubt was the real score. Because once you prove the devil can be robbed, he stops being myth. He starts acting like a man and collects interest.